Hey everybody, it's Tyler Esselman.
And Michael Osinski.
And you are listening to This One Goes to 11.
This One Goes to 11, the podcast where we invite someone we think is super cool to come on and talk to us about an album that they think just might be perfect.
So perfect, in fact, Michael, that 10 out of 10 just isn't good enough.
Hell no.
They do have to be super cool, though. That's I would say the defining trait of everyone we've had on this, every single solitary guest we've had on this podcast so far has been that they have been super cool.
Or as the French say, super cool.
Super cool.
Yeah, it's just a slight difference, but it's a significant one. Yeah,
there's a different flavor, if you will.
Yeah, the one of bouillabaisse. Anyway, we're going down a different road here.
How you doing today? You doing all right? You feeling good?
Doing all right. It is now officially autumnal here.
Sweet.
It is leaf peeping weather.
I heard our guest was talking about peeping some leaves too. So I am.
It's a thing. You in the North Country, New England area, people legitimately do that. So,
yeah, I mean, I would if I was up there. I'd peep all day long.
Yeah. Okay. Sure you want to say that?
Whoops.
Whoops. Reword that one. Anyway.
We've got a great guest today who is a fellow North Country resident of yours. And I'm very excited about this guest and this album. Michael, who are we talking to today?
We are talking to Gabriel Dorfsman-Hopkins. Gabriel is a mathematician and artist and is assistant professor at St. Lawrence University. That's right, we got another PhD on the pod.
Shit, yeah.
As a mathematician, they conduct research in arithmetic and p-adic analytic geometry. Gabriel also studies the intersection of art and math, working with 3D printing, fiber arts, electronics, and other media with an eye toward interactive models and installations. They've always been passionate about music, spending their younger years honking out free jazz on a baritone saxophone, and more recently attempting to pick bluegrass with a mandolin. And we get into that in the episode. We do talk about that in more detail.
Honkin' really is the only sound for a baritone sax, isn't it?
I think so. I mean,
honkin'.
I feel, yeah. How many different types of saxophones are there? I feel like whenever I'm doing my New York Times crossword, there's a new type of sax as one of the clues.
Alto, tenor, baritone, soprano.
Is there a bass sax?
No, I don't think so. I think baritone is the bass sax, but I know that soprano's that fourth one, right? Your Kenny G's and all that. But I count 4 at least, and I'm sure there are other variations. But to me, baritone sax fits Gabriel just perfectly. Yeah, just love that fit.
The second time that Kenny G has been mentioned on the podcast this season. I just want to acknowledge that.
I think the first invocation of Rick Rubin, though, I feel like we've talked about Rick Rubin produced albums before, haven't we?
I'm sure he's come up, never in this much detail. But yeah, I mean, I feel like Rick Rubin, Steve Albini, they're all going to pop in at some point on the pod. What did
you? I'm really excited about this one. This is an album that's near and dear to you. What do you want to whet the appetite of our listeners with?
I mean, yeah, this is an album that I full disclosure, an album that I'm a big fan of. And I think that a band, I don't want to give it away, even though, as we have established, they can simply read the episode description and they know what album we're talking about. I think if I had to describe this band's sound, it would be like if Rush got really angry and loud and really fast and we're doing harder drugs.
Yeah.
I think fairly accurate.
That's an apt description.
I think that's right. I think that's right.
And without any further ado, let's just frickin' do it. Here's Gabriel. Enjoy, everybody.
Gabriel Dorfsman-Hopkins, welcome to This One Goes to 11.
Thank you.
We're so glad to have you.
I'm excited. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Well, and we are, dear listeners, I must confess that this is one of those episodes where we didn't necessarily give the person the option of selecting a few different albums.
Yeah.
I mean, we sort of did, but it was mostly a matter of I ran into Gabriel at school, noticed their T-shirt and tattoo of the Mars Volta, and I was like, oh my god, I've never encountered someone wearing these things. And that prompted us to say, hey, do you want to be on the podcast? And let's talk about a Mars Volta album. And here we are. So I've kind of given away a little bit. Gabriel, would you just tell our listeners, what album hath thou brought before us today?
I'm bringing Deloused in the Comatorium by the Mars Volta, which I think is the perfect album and the best out, like the album that changed my life the first time I listened to it and has not receded since.
Man,
sort of
nice.
Your gut was right then, Michael. Your gut was right that this was. You did some quick math in your head when you saw the tattoo and the shirt, and that math was right. It was correct.
It's funny you should say math because of our guest here, but I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point.
I love my math. I love my math-minded friends and acquaintances. That's the not being one of those people. It's great to, and it's also great to to meta speak. It's great to have like analytical minds here on this podcast because you get a different flavor when you're talking about things from a right brain, left brain. Even though I think that's partially a myth, right? Yeah, you get that. You get the stew. The stew gets to be very rich, I think. Thank you for richening our stew. Yeah, Gabriel is what I'm saying.
Anything to continue the slow boil.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
low and slow.
Making a good roux today. But anyway, let's.
Well, yeah. So this is an album. This is I think among the I think there will be a significant portion of our audience who has heard of the Mars Volta but wasn't necessarily terribly familiar with their music. And luckily, we have a segment that is geared just towards those people. What's that segment called, Michael?
Why, I'm so glad you asked, Tyler. It's called The Beginner's Guide to the Mars Volta's Deloused in the Comatorium in 60 seconds.
Yep,
and Tyler's got it because I already know a lot about Mars Volta, and it would be unfair of me to have to say all that. We needed Tyler to do some work this week, so
yeah, we needed to put me through my paces in seeing how I could distill this band down into a nice little package, and also this album. And I think I did all right. We'll see. You'll get a chance to grade me, Gabriel. Not to give you more grading work. I'm sure you're right in the midst of the grading time this semester. But
it's about to get a whole lot worse.
Okay, so really we'll just kick it off for you, Michael. I would ask that you would have 60 seconds on a clock for me. Do you, my friend?
I've got 60 seconds on the clock. You ready, Tyler?
Yes.
Okay. 3, 2, 1, go.
Chances are you've heard of the Mars Volta, but do you really know who they are? A band that defies categorization and pushes the boundaries of progressive and otherworldly rock. This is the band formed in 2001 by former members of At the Drive-In, Omar Rodriguez-Lopez and Cedric Bixford Zavala. The Mars Volta emerged as a force to be reckoned with in the early 2000s with their full-length debut, Deloused in the Comatorium. It was met with both popular and critical acclaim and celebrated for its discipline, sharp edge, and raw intensity, throwing a heaping helping of prog into the pot with dashes of Latin rhythm, jazz fusion verve, and a dark ribbon of extraterrestrial angst, gifting listeners with an experience that took the qualities of the fellow's previous work and shot it off into unmapped but supremely satisfying territory. Cedric's mesmerizing vocals and Omar's virtuosic guitar work, the Mars Volta carved out a sound that's both challenging and hypnotic, and gathered what can only best be described as a cult following that saw them through continuous personnel changes and intermittent hiatuses. This is the Mars Volta.
All right.
Not my best work, but I
mean, they are a mystifying band, and I think that that makes sense. But Gabriel, so it's up to you. You get to determine how Tyler did, and you can use whatever rubric or scale you want. It can be letters, it can be numbers, it can be qualitative assessment. Should you desire that as well?
That's one of the hardest jobs in the world because the Mars Volta are sort of all over the place as a band. I think, you have moments that are like very tight and very carefully organized that it just then explode into this sort of like cacophonous chaos. And you're like, so what do they do? Do they do this tight, organized Latin jazz thing? Or are they like punk rockers who took too many mushrooms? Like, what's going on? Right. And so it's like very hard to sort of pin down. I thought you did a really great job.
Thank you.
I thought sort of, it's important to acknowledge that they came from At the Drive-In, even though it's like kind of a different world. I think a lot of people
totally.
it blows their minds that that's a real thing.
I've actually seen at the drive-in, I will say, that I have seen them in that format. I have never seen the Mars Volta. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you've got your chance to see the Mars Volta.
They're back.
They're back. They're touring, and they're playing songs that they haven't played since 2005.
Holy shit! Yeah, I can deal with that. I'm going to write down that you gave me a quote unquote a pretty good job, and you know what? I think that is a very fair. I think that is a very fair rating.
I also think it's really fun to recognize that they have like this sort of simultaneous like critical acclaim that like is contrasted with this yuck factor coming from some reviews.
Hell yeah.
It's kind of amazing. Do you ever read the Pitchfork reviews of the Mars Volta albums?
Yes, we have. Yes.
Oh, they're just absolutely just delightful to read. It's like somebody at Pitchfork decided that the Mars Volta just didn't deserve to exist.
Yeah.
Which is an issue. It's an issue in criticism in general, right? Like there's like that calls into question the very role of something like Pitchfork in the media landscape to say, because it is often goes to that place of like, should this band or this album even exist? Which I think is not the point of criticism, right? Or like at its core, that shouldn't, that's certainly not what we're trying to do here on this, platform. So like that, yeah, it feels like it gets so dire, and with a band as polarizing as the Mars Volta, I'm not even surprised that it elicits that sort of reaction.
Yeah, well, it's actually bonkers. You read the reviews of the first couple albums, and they're like, "What are these people trying to do? They're trying to be pretentious, and they're failing at it." And then the Mars Volta released this like new album just last year. And of course I have to go look at the Pitchfork review, and the Pitchfork review is like, what happened to this crazy pretentious band? This is not Mars Volta enough for me.
Yeah.
You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
How does one fail at being pretentious? I feel like that's something for a philosophy class.
Yeah.
It is. Before we get too deep into the album itself, because I get the sense that you're ready to take us on a journey, and I love that. I want to hear a little bit more about you, Gabriel. We met briefly on the campus of St. Lawrence, I think in passing, maybe in the dining hall. I think I might have seen you in the dining hall, maybe in that little back, the room where the faculty eats.
Or stadium, I think, maybe the sports bar.
Could have been there too.
Quotes around sports bar.
Shout out to Canton, New York. Lovely little burg. We want to know more about you, Gabriel. How would you characterize your relationship with music writ large in your life? What role does it play in your life?
Well, it plays, I would guess, a lot of different roles. When I was a kid, I was always dancing. I grew up in a Mexican family. We would listen to music while we cooked, and it was all about just sort of like dancing all the time while cooking dinner. And then I got very obsessive for a little while with a few bands. This really started with the Mars Volta. And so for a while, like it was all about finding albums that I could listen until just like I knew every single detail. Yeah. And it wasn't about dancing. It was about playing loud and like being alone and like having the headphones and like just pulling it apart into different pieces. And then I feel like I got sucked into the concert scene. So this was after high school, probably in college. And then when I was a grad student in Seattle, I got really sucked into the concert scene, and like capital S scene. Like I was into the party, I was into the music, I was into the people, I was into the traveling, I was into going to festivals and being in a tent, and the music was there and an important part of it for sure. And knowing the bands was part of the sort of culture, but like I got really sucked into like the scene part of it. And that sort of, I don't know. At this point in St. Lawrence, there's less, or in the North Country, there's less of that sort of than I had.
What do you mean?
Used to. But there's lots of musicians. So like simultaneously through my whole life, right? I had like the dancing phase. I had like the picking things apart and trying to find the most like, hardcore, weirdest stuff that I could phase, and then like the sort of party phase. But like I also like to play music.
What do you play?
Well, when I was in school, in like middle school and high school, I played the saxophone.
Nice.
And in high school in particular, me and another friend who were like just absolutely obsessed with the Mars Volta. Well, I was in the jazz band and stuff, but then we were both in jazz band, but then we would like hang out and like just do this like weird pretentious free jazz thing where I had this baritone saxophone and would just honk as loud as I could. And he was this just virtuoso guitar player who would
Really?
like sort of just like shred, and it was so fun. And we played the school coffee houses. And then that sort of like faded into the background a little bit. I started playing the mandolin just for fun, but only by myself really for a long time.
Yeah.
I developed this obsession with bluegrass in like 2016 or something, and really liked bluegrass music a lot. And I was like, I'm going to learn the mandolin. And then since moving to the North Country, I've met people who like to play old timey folk music. And so now I'm sitting around picking on porches with, on farms in the North Country, and it's a whole different vibe, and it's kind of awesome. I really do love it. I love sort of getting back into playing music with people because I was playing music by myself since leaving high school until maybe this year. Music was a sort of thing I did in private. And so my relationship of listening to music and then playing music have always been sort of like parallel things, other than that weird free jazz thing with my Mars Volta friend in high school. Now it's maybe coming together again, but also because bluegrass is just a thing that I listen to a lot now.
You know, not to say that that's not, that your experience is clearly particular, but I do see this return to bluegrass among other people that I know, that like you get to a certain point in your life and you're like, oh, what are the kind of building blocks of the music that I listen to? What are the things that I can, like, if I can break this down into its constituent parts, what's the music that I can play or the music that I can experience that I guess really kind of like represents the roots? And like bluegrass and like other folk music, I find so many people coming back to that, especially when you get to your 30s and, like you get to that point in your life. You're like, I just need something. I need something I can access right here, right now, with this guitar or this mandolin, or like these other people we can jam. I think it's very jammable. It seems to be a very important asset to bluegrass.
It's easy to call a tune and have, teach it to 3 people in 5 minutes and then play together, and then call another tune 5 minutes later, and sort of like, even if it's your first time playing it, like, I think it would be very hard to teach someone like, Roulette Dares and jam on that.
I mean, yeah, it's sort of like when I listen to the Mars Volta, it sounds to me like, AP guitar playing, because it's just, I mean, it sort of makes me wish that, I remember when I first heard the album, I thought like, geez, I wish I could play guitar like that. But like, you can't just sit down and be like, oh, I'm just going to pick up this tune. Like you have to spend years of studying, and then even when you had studied for years, trying to figure it out would be tricky too. I mean, for you, is music something that you've just been curious about, or is it something that you connect with on an emotional level too?
I mean, it's carried me through so many different aspects of my life. It's been either like, the center of my like coming of age rebellion, as it is for so many people, just trying to find music that people don't like and then learning how to like it. It was such a part of my like party scene of my 20s, was like, knowing all the cool bands and all the cool DJs and going to all the cool shows and being just like immersed in the Seattle music scene, and having that be the sort of core component of my social space. And it's the saving grace of the North Country for me, I think. Like the only, the fact that I've like been able to find community just through playing music, which is something I've always dreamed of. But the Seattle music scene was so intimidating as a player, but it was great. It was easy to get into as a partier, right?
Yeah, it seems like it would be. Yeah,
there's so much legacy to the Seattle music scene too.
I mean, maybe it was just where I was with my age, but also, it's just, I don't know. I feel like it's been a constant companion, and I think that's true in like emotional ways. You've always got, in like nostalgia ways, and into like making sort of a continuity. Like albums go with you as you move so often, and remind you of different times in your life. I've never been in one place for more than like 6 years. Like even as a kid, we moved around a lot, and then this academic lifestyle is like ping pong, right? But some of these albums sort of come with you and remind you of, I don't know, provide some level of continuity.
When you were Lisa Simpsoning it and jamming in high school. Sounds like Mars Volta was one of the first. Gift our listeners and us with a few of the other bands that were part of that for you. I got this stew metaphor that I continue to come back to, but it is just so good. Like who else were you listening to that kind of like influenced your taste at that time?
I was really into this band called The Fall of Troy.
Oh God, that sounds great.
Which is a like extremely hardcore prog metal band, like super screamy with really shreddy guitar. And I just thought it was absolutely bonkers. The fact that he was able to do this, it was a 3-piece band that sounds like there's got to be at least 6 people up there. I actually got to see them once in Seattle too. It was spectacular.
Cool.
But so that was sort of more on the sort of hardcore thing. I feel like from the Mars Volta, I leaned into hardcore, but then I also sort of leaned into jammy stuff. So like on one side, I was like really into like The Fall of Troy or like Horse the band or, maybe on the slightly less screamy side, things like Coheed and Cambria and a lot of this sort of prog metal stuff. Eventually Tool. But then on the other side, I was just like so into the Grateful Dead, like just absolutely just would listen to the Grateful Dead all the time and like loved sort of the kind of stoner rock kind of stuff, things like Dispatch and Sublime and then I had this I had this Nick Drake phase where just like all I would do was listen to like Pink Moon was just on repeat in my car for so long.
That's an all-timer. That is a perfect song. I will go so far as to say I think Pink Moon is right up there.
Well, so this was actually a funny thing. This was, I think, 2008. I was really into this album, and there's in particular this song called "Things Behind the Sun," just for this really short thing. There's no like verse chorus thing. It's just like one sort of poem set to music with this really nice guitar playing. And then the Mars Volta released Bedlam and Goliath, and it has 2 bonus tracks, and one is a cover of "Things Behind the Sun." And I was like,
no way.
Are you kidding me? How is this possible? How is this even happening? It felt like this sort of like cosmic collision of like 2 sides of listening to music that I never really sort of saw coming together. That did.
No wonder you got the bluegrass and the North Country vibe in you, though, with the the Nick Drake and the Dispatch. That all makes sense. Did you ever listen to State Radio? That was the
I did.
The tangential project to Dispatch. I loved State Radio.
They came and played in the town where I went to high school. For like a little fundraiser event.
That's so great.
And it was really, I liked State Radio.
I still listen to that song, Mr. Larkin, every now and then. Because it incidentally was the name of my elementary school science teacher was Mr. Larkin. So I was like, there was serendipity there as well. Serendipity starring John Cusack and Kate Beckinsale people. I gave you a shitload of points, by the way. I gave you 3,000 points for they're trying to be pretentious and they're failing. I gave you 6,000 points for dancing being at the core of your like musical upbringing. I love that. 10,000 points for talking about the capital S scene, because I do think, I live in LA right now. I lived in Chicago, and those scenes can be very insular as much as they can be, as much as they can foster, like each person's individuality and their voice. So I think it's a well-made point there. Michael, I gave Gabriel 13,000 points for you talking about AP guitar playing as well, because I think that contributes to our case here.
I'll take them and donate them. Yeah. I feel like the big thing we still got to talk about here is how on earth did you discover this particular album? And do you remember where you were the first time you heard it? Like, who did someone recommend it to you? Like, how did this all come to be?
Yeah.
Set the scene.
Must have been ninth grade. I think it was 2005 in the fall. So Francis the Mute had also come out in Mars Volta timeline. But there was a new kid in school, and we became really fast friends really quick. And he had moved from New Jersey to this podunk town in New Hampshire where we lived, and was like, oh my God, nobody listens to cool music here. But we became fast friends. He was actually the person that I did this free jazz thing with eventually. I was like trying to get into cool music. Like I like had this idea that I should get into cool music. I really wanted like alternative music, but I didn't know what that meant. So I would listen to I knew I liked the Grateful Dead and I liked jammy stuff, and I knew I liked Latin music because that was what I was sort of raised on. I was coming out of my Eminem middle school phase was sort of over.
Less, yeah. Rest in peace.
I was getting into like Panic at the Disco at the time. I was like, okay. So there's something sort of like maybe I could wear black eyeliner. Like this could be a thing. And I was talking to him, and he was like, "This is what you need." And so one day he comes to school and he gives me this CD, just like the CD, like not in a case, not anything. He just burned me a CD, and in pen on it it says TMV Deloused. And he's like, "Listen to this." And I was like, "I don't know what this is." So I put it on my iPod Nano. And the first two albums I had on this iPod Nano, I had just gotten it. And the first two things I had on it were that album, the Deloused and the Comatorium, and Working Man's Dead by the Grateful Dead. And that's all that was on this iPod Nano for a long time, actually. You can go a long way with just those two albums. And so here's the funny thing. And I think about this time a lot because so I had a school project, and it was for a math class. And it was using equations to draw a picture. So we were studying conic sections, quadratic equations, two variables to like make different shapes. And you want to sort of use those shapes to make a picture. So I was doing a steal your face, like a Grateful Dead Steely, made all out of math equations parameterized by it. And so I was like, let's listen to music and do mathematical art, and listen to the Mars Volta and the Grateful Dead. And so I started with this Mars Volta, and I'm like trying to figure out these equations. And it starts with Sonne Lumière, which is, it's like this sort of ethereal kind of vibey thing. There's some cool vocals. There's some like space stuff going on. This cool guitar riff, like, or maybe I think it's a guitar riff. And I'm like, okay, this is pretty chill. This is cool. I like it. Like, I like the voice. I was into this sort of like high pitched voice alternative kind of thing. I like Panic at the Disco. So, it was going to be great. And then that first sort of intro-y song ends, and I'm like, this is sort of vibing. And then there's this sudden moment when Inertiatic ESP starts, and it's this explosion of chaos and sound, but it's not like cacophony. It's like carefully crafted. And the guitar riff just explodes, and it's like it's almost like a jump scare. It becomes super loud, super sudden. The voice just becomes it's like the only way I can describe it is like perfect. The notes are sort of like pure. It's high pitched. You can understand what he's saying for maybe the only point in the album. You hear this like this "Now I'm Lost" coming out, and this guitar riff that's like da na 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 na, and they're not fighting each other, but it's not like someone's playing chords and someone's singing over it. There's like this melody that just explodes with Cedric singing, this other melody that just explodes with Omar playing guitar, and this sort of drum, like this just incredibly complex drum piece, and it's all so loud. And it's like they're not fighting with each other. And of course, on a first listen, I couldn't pick it apart. I was just like, what just happened?
Right.
And I knew right away, like this explosion of sound and chaos, but like controlled chaos. It hooked me, and I couldn't even pay attention to like what I was doing. This sort of math art project for school. And I just had to sort of listen and like, with the little white earbud Apple things. And, and that song, I think, I like remember that moment sitting at my dining room table with my headphones in. It was sort of calm. I was sort of doing some stuff, and then it was just like it hit, and it was this like this momentous moment in my life. And I listened to the rest of the album through, and I was able to like do some of the project as well. But it's one of these albums that really captures your attention. It's hard to pay attention to other things. And, you know, it transitions into like inertiatic. And I remember this into like roulette dares. And I remember this just like wanting to sing along with like this exoskeletal junction at the railroad delayed. Like just by the second chorus, it was already sort of stuck in my head and I was singing along the whole time through. It was like, I couldn't even tell when one song ended and the next song begun, or if the songs were changing in the middle. You know, I didn't know the names of every of the song. They were all really, really long. I'm glancing at the iPod. I'm like, what is this one called? I'm trying to listen to the lyrics. They make no sense. These guitar solos, some of which that are just sort of like explosive, loud things. And then some that are like chill, like jazz bar in a cave kind of sort of noodling. And then it ends as suddenly as it begins, you know, at the like with I guess the last line is like, who brought me here? And again, it's like this one sort of like ringing high Cedric note,
and it's gone.
It's gone. And I was hooked, and and so I listened to it over and over again. Like the whole time I did that project, that's actually what I did. I listened to this album, and then I listened to Working Man's Dead, and then Deloused and the Comatorium, and then Working Man's Dead, and then Deloused and the Comatorium, and then Working Man's Dead, and then Deloused and the Comatorium. While doing like, and this project took forever. There were like 200 equations. I needed to like find three, like you do the sketch, you find 3 points on the equation, you find the equation for it, then you like sort of extend it and find bounds and then do it again. And I chose way too complicated a shape to do this. So I'm making, and it's kind of bonkers because I was reflecting on this last year, because last year I went to, the Mars Volta released a new album. I was really excited. I went to go see them. It was the fall. I was living in the East Coast again. The leaves were changing. And I was like, this is so strange. New Mars Volta album. I'm walking to work. The leaves are changing. I'm transported back in time. And then I think for a moment and I'm like, so I feel like I've changed a lot since the 9th grade. Like I've gone through so many phases. I've moved 1,000 times. I've developed all these new skills, all these new relationships, all these new friends. I've gone through things. My whole personality has changed at least 17 times. And yet here I am in the Northeast doing mathematics, doing art, listening to the Mars Volta and listening to the Grateful Dead. Like what has changed?
Well, do you think that you did change? Do you think, or is this, are we coming towards a thesis that we are just our 9th grade self somewhere deep inside of us all the time?
I haven't figured it out.
I sure hope not. I don't want to be my 9th grade self again.
I was reminded the other day how swagless I was at that time, and I think to myself, there is a swagless bit of me that will always be somewhere inside me. There is a very swagless part of myself. But to what you're saying, I don't think it's essentially who I am, but that there will be those time travel moments for the rest of my life. And clearly you had one. Clearly you had one this past fall. I'm going to give you 1,000,000 points for that time travel moment, by the way. And I gave you 50,000 points for saying that I knew I should be into cool music. I thought that was apt too, because Michael, if you and I haven't had that thought sometime in our lives, then I don't know what we're doing.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So you've led us straight to it, Gabriel. Why don't you tell us what you have chosen as your standout track on the album, so that we can let our listeners get a taste of what we're talking about, so they get a little context, right?
So I think inertiatic ESP, because of that time travel moment, the sudden explosion of chaos that comes out of that, just like is the Mars Volta starting to exist, is the birth of the Mars Volta to the world, and was to me as well. And I think I was told by y'all that this is an okay thing to do. That I think that Sonne, it really is paired with Sonne Lumiere. Like I think the sort of jump scare, the chaos, the sudden change in dynamic. You really want to listen to the first track as well, which is only 1:30 and is sort of like this chill chill by Mars Volta standards intro. It feels like really an intro to inertiatic. I think that's not a controversial thing to say.
I don't think so. And we could, I think Tyler, we can do that for our listeners, right? Yeah,
we can do anything, and I'd be happy. I'd be happy to stack those two together in the order, in the running order. So yeah, let's give those a listen, so that you cats out there can know what the hell we're talking about.
Yeah, all you cool cats and kittens out there.
Cool cats and kittens, and then we'll be back in just a second. That's the end of part 1. If you access this episode via our YouTube playlist, you're about to hear our guest's standout track. If you'd like to jump ahead to part 2, you'll find a link in the description of this episode.